Welcome to the Derek Loudermilk Show. This is episode 364 with Aaron Abke. Aaron Abke is a world-renowned spiritual teacher and a YouTube star. He happens to be a former Christian minister who left Christianity to study the mystical Jesus, and he went deep into understanding the nature of the universe, and he encountered some of these channeled texts like the Law of One. And so we're going to hear all about what he's learned about the nature of the universe, the densities of consciousness, how the human body and the chakra system is a mirror of the structure of the universe, how souls and species and consciousness groups progress and evolve. And we also get to hear Aaron introduce a brand new framework of thinking about spirituality and personal growth evolution, something he's created called spiritual intelligence. So he's pretty much releasing it just now on his YouTube channel and here on our podcast. So this is very exciting. Without further ado, here is Aaron Abke. Aaron Abke, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Derek. It's a pleasure to be with you, man.
Likewise. And maybe we could just start with, I guess we could call you a spiritual teacher, but how'd you get into this?
Great question. I would say that I grew up very religious. I was a pastor's kid, and I was always very devout with my Christian faith. I wasn't one of those like brownie point Christians, but I was like all about that life, you know? So I was doing worship leading growing up as a kid and a teenager, and my dad being the senior pastor, I obviously wanted to be like him and follow in his footsteps and all that. So I went to Oral Roberts University in Tulsa to get my degree in music and theology, and then got my first gig as a full-time worship pastor at 22 years old. And then very shortly after that, I was forced to reconsider my faith in a radical way because the church I had been hired at was very fundamentalist. And the church I grew up in was like very much like the best representation of what Christianity should be. We just emphasized the love of God, the forgiveness of God. We worshiped our butts off, man. We healed people. It was just so much fun growing up in my dad's church. So I didn't really have to think about like, well, does Jesus send people to hell or not? Is the Bible really, the inerrant written word of God or not, and all these things. So we were trying to figure out like, how do we, reconcile these beliefs? Because they had all the Bible verses to back them up. So it ended up being that the answer was we couldn't reconcile them and we had to jump ship. So I moved back to Oklahoma where I'd gone to college and met her family. So we stayed out there for another 4 years while I went through this massive deconstruction period and started getting to Eastern philosophy, and just sort of as it is when you leave a cult or a religion for the first time, your worldview is so inverted, and you're like, oh man, anything's possible. I can now explore anything I want without worrying about being called a heretic by my friends. So I did that, and that led me to non-duality teachings. First, it was like Alan Watts, Eckhart Tolle, all the classics, and then I got really heavy into Hinduism and Buddhism, and started seeking down that path really heavy. And at 27, I had a sort of a intense mystical experience or awakening experience that left me in a kind of samadhi state for 2 weeks. And I experienced what people describe as, maybe self-realization or enlightenment. And it's one thing to know about it, through reading it and listening to lectures about it. It's an entirely different thing to experience it. So after I experienced it, long story short, I felt like I had lost it. I had done something to screw it up. The universe had given me this free sample of enlightenment, and there I went, going back to my ego, and I ruined it. So I felt guilty and upset at myself. And I was like, I am going to walk out of my life altogether and devote every waking second of my existence to how do I get back to that state? Because once you taste the kingdom of heaven inside of you, that nothing else can really satisfy you. So it was that quest that kind of brought me into, I guess, where I am today as a spiritual teacher.
Can you describe more what it felt like, that state you're referring to?
Yeah, I can try. It's fun to try to describe because words always fail miserably, but um, it's probably easiest to describe sort of how I was experiencing reality differently. So I like to say that when the personal self disappears, you've always heard these teachings in non-duality, like there's seeing, but there's no seer, right? There may even be thinking, but there's no thinker. Well, to experience that's pretty wild, because it's even more true than the words give credit to. I was so devoid of a personal sense of self, like it was as if there was no inside anymore, if that could make sense. So like I would just be in this state of pure childlike wonder at reality. Just everything was just amazing. Like how is this, are these water molecules in this form like this? How does the body drink them? It's just incredible. Everything's a miracle, right? And I would literally walk by the mirror every so often and be like surprised to see a reflection staring back at me. I would feel like I wouldn't remember how I got places very often. I would just be like, I was working at Google at the time. So thankfully the programming and conditioning of the body could still operate to some extent. So I could drive to work just in this samadhi state. I get to work, I'm training my clients and they're like, wow, Aaron, your energy is very different today. I'm like, yeah, I'm just so happy. And I'm just so happy to be here with you. They're like, okay, creepy, So it was kind of like that. And I'll tell you what kicked me out of it was I woke up on 2 weeks to the day where that experience had happened. And a thought occurred to me, wow, it's been 2 weeks that I've been in this state of consciousness unbroken. I wonder if this is my permanent state. I wonder if I am enlightened, right? That was the first ego thought. So a claimer reintroduced itself and claimed that state for itself. There's now a self who is enlightened. And that's a huge difference. Before there was just enlightenment, or as I like to call it, illumination, just a total illumination of consciousness. And then when the ego, the sense of me, my stories and the Aaron character and all the memories he has come into that picture and say, oh, this is now my state of consciousness. That's what brought ego back online. And I didn't really catch it when it happened because I just thought, wow, like maybe this is like my Eckhart Tolle experience. And slowly but surely I started, old thoughts came back, suffering came back. And then after that experience, suffering was much worse. It was like straight into the dark night of the soul. So that gave me a lot of resource to do some spiritual seeking.
And you mentioned what took you out of it. What was there something that led you into that state?
Definitely. Yeah. It was definitely from intense seeking. I would give that first credit. Any good sage will tell you that the number one key to enlightenment or liberation is to want it more than anything else. And that was definitely where I was, because I was suffering a lot before that experience happened. A lot of it was from the sort of inversion of my whole frame of reference for reality, not being a Christian anymore. It's very hard to lose such a huge component of your identity. And there was this feeling of like, who am I now without being a Christian? I don't even know who Aaron is without being a Christian. Like if someone had met me, it's like, hi, I'm Aaron, I'm a Christian. It was like as synonymous as my first name. So I was suffering a lot from that. And then a lot of painful breakups, and like my divorce with my first wife. My parents had been married. They're still married, happily married for 38 years. They have the most picturesque relationship and marriage you can really imagine. So I grew up with that example and I always wanted that. I always wanted to be in love, get married young, have a family. So having that heartbreak also contributed that all my dreams haven't been realized and all this stuff. So I was seeking really heavily for freedom from that suffering. And what happened was I was at a period of time where there was so much depression and really toxic thoughts in my mind. I would go up to this balcony above the gym I worked at. I was working at Google at the time as a personal trainer. Mm-hmm. So I would take a break at lunch, eat my lunch, and I would listen to Eckhart Tolle on the balcony and just watch the clouds and stuff. And that would give me a lot of peace to listen to Eckhart. And so I did that for like 2 or 3 months, I think. And then on the day it happened, I believe it was August 17th, 2017. I was listening to a lecture where Eckhart was mimicking things the ego would say. And then he would sort of laugh at it. And then the audience would laugh at it. And then I would laugh because it's like, oh, we all relate to this voice. We all hear this voice. So he would say, if only things had gone my way, then I would truly be happy. And and then the audience laughs and then it dies down. He thinks of a new thing. If only people would be nicer to me, then I would truly be happy. So he did that for like, 5 minutes and I was just laughing. And, laughter can be a really powerful form of realization, right? That's why we love comedy. And so I realized through laughing at the absurdity of it all, like sort of like a big cosmic joke has been played on me that there's just this tape recorder on a loop. And I've been somehow hypnotized into thinking that I'm that tape recorder, that voice in the head. And it was just so clearly not me. It's like, we all have these dumb thoughts. How can those dumb thoughts be any of us, right? It's so obvious. So that laughter deepened the realization, I think. And all of a sudden it was like the doors got blown off of my consciousness. I like to joke and say that it felt like someone tied my ego in a broom closet for 2 weeks. Like he was just totally MIA. But when he came back with a vengeance.
Wow. That's incredible. And, as I'm interviewing different spiritual teachers and researchers, there often seems to be some incident like this, like in the hero's journey, the inciting incident. I have my own story is a special story with a 1,000-year-old magical tree that gave me my first out-of-body experience, which is
wow,
rad. I noticed that you're still wearing a cross. What's the significance of that for you at this moment?
It's an awesome question. I have a series on my channel called Mystical Jesus. One of the things that happened to me when I left Christianity was that I became even more passionate about Jesus. And I always was. Jesus was like my life. It's all I cared about. I wanted to be like Jesus. I would read the Gospels every day. But it was because my love for Jesus was so great that I had to leave Christianity because it was so hypocritical. And it was like, this God you preach on stage, I don't know. I don't see this God in Jesus. And if any version of God doesn't look like Jesus, I'm not interested. So I have a video on my channel called Why I Left Christianity for Jesus, where I tell the whole story. And so in rethinking Christ, who was this man? Why is he so inspiring? What gave this man the power to speak the words he spoke that would one day become household quotes? Like what was inspiring this man? Because clearly Jesus wasn't inspired by himself, right? He didn't confess himself as his Lord and Savior to get where he was. He got the revelation of God consciousness he had because he knew I and the Father are one, right? So it became clear to me like, oh, this was an enlightened sage just who happened to be born in first century Israel. So that made Jesus way more interesting. So in the coming years of really studying mystical Christianity and how the mystics saw and communed with Christ inwardly, and almost all got burned at the stake for it, I started to see that the cross and so many of the gospel archetypes have very deep metaphysical meaning far beyond the biblical stories we're used to, especially the crucifixion and resurrection. It's that picture of dying to the self, as Christ would say, if you want to be my disciple, you have to die to yourself first, and then you can follow me. And that's like the ultimate picture of that on the cross, total surrender, right, to the dissolution of the person. And then what happens? The resurrection of the spirit, the eternal dimension. So the cross to me represents that intersection of the vertical and the horizontal, where spirit and flesh intersect is you and I, right? We are spirit in flesh. All of us are the Christ, as the Course in Miracles would say. So a cross to me, all I see is that sort of, it's like the ultimate symbol for God union to me.
So your understanding of the actual crucifixion was that it was a real event and that Jesus was in a state where it wasn't important, his body wasn't important, and that was like an important a thing to show people? Or what's your understanding of that actual like tale?
Mhm. Well, I think because Christ was teaching so much about dying to the personal self, and you see more of this in the Gospel of Thomas, which wasn't included in the canonical Gospels. But even in the canonical Gospels, it's there pretty obviously. And so I think Christ knew he was going to be a martyr from the start, especially in the day and age he lived in. If he had been born in India or Tibet, he could have said all those things, no problem. And he would have had much better language to put them in too, right? With Hindu philosophy, oh man, there's a lot you can say using their philosophy. But when you have just first century, Judaism to pull from, how do you put non-duality in words when this whole language system is built on separation, right? Like God is a monotheistic man in the sky, separate from us, and so on and so forth. So Christ, did his best to put his God realization in words they would kind of understand. Like I and the Father are one. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. The kingdom of heaven is within you. So I think Christ knew that. I mean, the Law of One actually talks about this when they ask Ra, like, what was up with Jesus? And he gives his whole story. It says he came here to be a martyr. He wanted to help this struggling first century world in the Middle East, which only knew separation and was really locked into a third density consciousness. So he came down to be the catalyst to springboard humanity out of that, delusion of separation, which I think he very much did. So the cross to me was him saying, like, here's the ultimate, in one sense, here's the ultimate testament of my message. I am not attached to this body. I am not this body. He would almost get frustrated with people sometimes, right? Saying like, how can you ask me to show you the Father when you've been with me this long? Don't you know when you look at me, you're looking at the supreme being? So it's like, if he's going to back that up, he's got to prove it, right? So the cross, he always knew for sure. He was a very smart guy. He always knew he would get killed for what he was teaching. And he even would say that, right? I'm not going to be here very long. They're going to come for me. But the cross was him being like, see, there's nothing to fear. There's no separation.
Do you interact with any fundamentalist Christians, and have you been able to explain your understanding to them in a way that they accept it?
I don't interact with them so much anymore because I'm so into heretic zone for them that they just don't even try with me. I'll get comments on mystical Jesus videos still from angry fundamentalists, and that's to be expected. But when I first started YouTube, I was starting a series called Moving Backwards, which was all about, I wanted to give questioning Christians like myself, like a healthy landing place to go. Because I had a lot of friends who would leave Christianity and throw the Bible in the dumpster, throw Jesus in the dumpster. It's all bullshit. I was so stupid to believe that. And it would really hurt my heart because it's like, no, man, no, you're not seeing this right. It's not all bullshit. There's a ton of gold we can rescue from this faith, especially Jesus, right? If you're going to not throw anything away, don't throw him away. But it was like, well, give me a reason to. Why should I? I don't know how to see this faith in any other light. And I had done like years, like 3 or 4 years of relentless daily research in the Bible, Gnostic Gospels, Christian mysticism, trying to come up with satisfying answers to these questions of, if God is just and good, what does he do with bad people if he doesn't send them to hell? Christians they're so locked into the hell model that they want answers to those questions. So I made this series to go, belief by belief, question by question. There's like 30 something videos where I just give them my new point of view of here's a better way to see this, right? It's actually that we're creating heaven and hell based on following or knowing God or not. God's not sending us there per se. We're actually sending ourselves there in a sense. So these narratives in the Bible do have some credence, right? This is an ancient world with ancient language that didn't have science like we do, at least not that we know of. So they couldn't put it into words the way that would satisfy us today. They used They used metaphors and stories and things like that to tell their theology and spiritual truth. So they weren't a literalistic culture like we are. They would tell stories to leave things more open-ended, but we read things now through a scientific lens and go, Lazarus was in hell. So they're saying it's a literal place. And so I have to sort of explain to them, no, that's not how it works when you read these old scriptures. You have to get into the mindset of a first century Jew and what world were they living in? How would they have heard these scriptures? And then you can start understanding the book a lot better. It becomes more of an unfolding narrative, right, about mankind's journey of evolution towards knowing God from this super primitive animal sacrifice model. Then you have the prophets who are like, God doesn't desire animal sacrifices. He desires you to sacrifice your heart to him. To have a broken and contrite spirit is God's sacrifice. It's like, well, that's really radical. Then boom, we have Jesus who says, I am the ultimate revelation of God. No one's ever seen God at any time until me, right? I am the ultimate revelation of the Father. And so I go to Jesus and say, this should be our new starting point, right? We should interpret everything behind this through the lens of Christ, not the other way around.
Mm-hmm. What's striking me is both when you're talking about the language, how to describe these things, in the Bible, and you trying to describe your samadhi experience. There's this, we rely on the precision of our language these days, and yet we can't get to a place to accurately portray these things. It's an interesting lens that's constricting our understanding in a way.
Quite paradoxical.
Do you have a sense for what Jesus was like before, when he was younger, before they talk about him in the Bible? Because I think, for 20 years, there's not much written about him.
Mm-hmm. I definitely have my own theories. Yeah. And the law of one sort of backs up a lot of the theories I do have. I think that Christ was a very enlightened soul, a very enlightened child. We know that through the scriptures, right? There's the passage of Mary and Joseph can't find Jesus, and they're searching all through the town in a panic for him. And then they finally go to the temple, and there he is sitting with all the rabbis, reading and teaching the scriptures with them. And they're all amazed at this 12-year-old kid who knows the scriptures so well. And his understanding of the divine was so advanced for his age. And his parents say, like, Jesus, we've been worried sick about you. Why would you do this to us? And he looks at them super confused. He's like, what? Why wouldn't you know to find me here? Where else would you look for me? It's like, okay, this was a super enlightened kid. But then we don't have anything till 30. So there's 18 missing years. Jesus shows up and he's this incredible miracle worker, just incredible healing miracles, walking on water, raising the dead. And, in the Eastern tradition, these are called cities. In the Sanskrit, it's called a siddhi, which is like a supernatural power or psychic gift. And we know through ancient Hindu scriptures, the Vedas, the Upanishads talk about the awakening of Kundalini life force energy. Ancient Kriya Yoga, Kundalini Yoga, they would awaken this dormant life energy within all of us at the base of the spine. And they say these psychic abilities start manifesting once the Kundalini is awakened. So I really strongly believe, because there's no way that all of the miracles Christ did were totally made up, and he didn't do any miracles at all, and someone just started pretending he did, and then everyone else believed it and wrote the same things. Like, at some point somewhere, someone would say, I'd never heard a story about this guy doing miracles. He was just a teacher. Like, what is this? But all through the Gospels, the Gnostic Gospels, he's always attributed as being an incredible miracle worker. And we know people today who can do miracles like this. So why wouldn't we believe that Christ was, right? So taking that as evidence, I think Christ surely must have traveled to the East in those missing years. I think firstly, he probably got in league with some of the Essenes, or a Christian faction, a Judaistic faction like the Essenes, one of the Gnostic factions around back then, who were much more mystical in their orientation and very much shunned the religious dogma of the day. He probably first got in league with them, and then they probably told him, hey, there's people in the East who really know what's up, And then he probably went to Tibet or India and learned under some kind of, self-realized master or multiple, because he comes back totally enlightened, teaching about enlightenment and self-realization and non-duality and doing miracles. It's like, if that doesn't show you he went to India, nothing will, in my estimation.
So you mentioned the law of one and it corroborating. Could you give just a brief intro to what is the law of one?
Yeah, the law of one is, in my belief, the most incredible channeled work. Just slightly above A Course in Miracles for me in terms of the profundity of the text when you read it. It was a channeled work from the early 80s from a group of three researchers, we could call them. They were researching the UFO phenomenon back in the 80s, which was becoming really prevalent. And somehow this group of about 12 people understood that if we're going to really know who these beings are who keep showing up in our skies with these incredible crafts that can defy all the laws of physics that we know, we should probably be more interested in their spirituality and philosophy than their science. So because of that, they started practicing channeling. And I don't know how long, maybe better part of 10 years, I think, they had this group of 12 people trying to contact extraterrestrials through channeling. And it was all men, which was their first mistake. For some reason, women have a more natural ability to channel, I think, than men. And so one day, one of the girlfriends of one of the guys in the group, her name was Carla Ruckart, joined him along to a session and watched them all trying to channel. And they would get some contacts, but not super profound contacts. And Carla was like, this is amazing. I want to learn how to do this. And she started practicing. And I think within a matter of a few months, less than a year, they were in a session and she had this entity come through named Ra, who identified itself as Ra. And Don, who was the leader of the group and a physics teacher and scientist, he's like, oh, wow, this is a genuine contact. So they said, let's dedicate a channeling session to this being with three of us. Don will be the questioner, Carla, obviously the channeler, Jim McCarty, the scribe, who's writing down everything being said. So they did that, and they ended up having 106 sessions over a 4-year period, interacting with and basically just a Q&A with an extraterrestrial being called Ra, who identifies itself as a 6th density social memory complex. And so when you hear that, you're like, yeah, I would imagine that if one could talk to advanced extraterrestrials, it would be something very out of our framework, very like, oh, wow, this is incredible. I didn't know the universe worked this way. And that's what you get when you read the Law of One. There's this feeling of, yeah, I always knew the universe worked like this. This makes perfect sense. And it's exciting. And it's like every part of you says yes to it, but it's also totally mind blowing at the same time. So it's one of those also very paradoxical feelings. But I started reading it years ago and couldn't put it down and couldn't believe that there wasn't more material on it online. And I just started a YouTube channel about 6 months before that. So I thought, hey, why not me? I'll start making some videos. So I made the first video on the 7 densities of consciousness, which is kind of I would say the most foundational teaching the Law of One presents, of like, this is how the universe works. And this is how the journey of the soul works. And I didn't really think people were going to resonate with it too much. I thought it would be weird to most people or whatever, but I was wrong. People were like, this is incredible. I want more. Give me more. So I was like, okay, supply and demand. And I just started churning out Law of One videos, and it just blew up on my channel.
Wow. The only other person who I've really known to dig into that material is David Wilcock.
Yes.
Do you know him, or have you guys chatted about this?
I've never met David. I've been to Gaia a few times. They want to make a Law of One show. They found my YouTube channel and it's like, oh, we got to get this guy on. So we were in preliminary talks last year to do a show, and then they had to push it back because they had Stephen Greer and all these other shows they had contracts with. So we're planning on hopefully trying to film a show later this year in the fall or the winter time. So I've been there a number of times. I've met the producers who worked with David, and they're all huge Law of One fans, and they've been really wanting to do like a dedicated Law of One show. So I'm excited about that opportunity. That's great. I mean, you're the person to do it. As
as you're telling me about, like, you were trained to be a minister or a preacher, and like watching you deliver your YouTube, I can see your comfort level with like the ease at which you teach these spiritual concepts.
Totally. Yeah. Watching my dad preach for, 20 something years definitely helped.
That's so cool. And I love seeing people's backstory to understand, like, obviously you put this stuff on YouTube and you're going to have success because you can talk about it in a way that people can get it.
Yeah. Well, that's what's funny, man, was I never would have had a clue that I was like had a gifting for speaking or teaching at all. Because as a worship leader, I love to lead worship. I loved worshiping. That was my favorite thing, just connecting to God. But man, when I had to talk into the microphone, I hated it. Like I never knew what to say. I felt awkward. Insecurities would come up. Like nobody wants to hear what I have to say. Just shut up and sing, So I always had this belief of like, I'm not meant to be a speaker. Maybe I could work on it and one day like deliver a message that's half as good as my dad can or something. But I got so passionate after I left Christianity, going through the whole mystical Christianity, re-envisioning Christianity. And I was teaching about that on Facebook through like posts and stuff. And once I started YouTube videos, I was like, I just have to get this information out to the world and I'm going to die if I don't. So my passion kind of like took over and I started making these videos and people started commenting like, wow, you're really gifted at speaking. And I kid you not, for over a year, I didn't believe for a nanosecond that anyone was being genuine. I just thought they were being nice because, oh, this kid, he's out here doing his best and trying to help people. So let's just compliment him and make him feel good. And there was like one comment that I got about a year or so into doing YouTube where someone just went on this long description about how gifted they saw that I was and how I helped them so much. And I read it and I just couldn't any more believe that it was just them being nice. And I had to really consider like, maybe I do have some ability to do this. So it's been an interesting journey because I never would have pictured myself as somebody who would teach publicly.
It's so interesting. A lot of times you hear about people reading YouTube comments and they're negative and then they're like, it hurts to read them. But it sounds like the comments were telling you, you're good at this. And you were like, nah. And then finally it took all these people to convince you.
Yeah. And I mean, I definitely have plenty of negative comments and that's also been a great catalyst, but for sure more positive than negative.
As you were talking about your experience, I was just remembering when I was in church and we had confirmation year, it was in high school sometime, but we had to give a sermon, like each person had to deliver.
Oh, wow.
You get probably 5 minutes or something, but I remember getting super into it. And I haven't thought about this in a long time, but I was like so stoked to be able to deliver a message and like wrap it up with a
That's how you know you're meant to do it. And here you are as a podcaster. What are the odds?
Yeah, what are the odds? Yeah. So who is Ra? Who is Ra, the law of one?
So Ra, they identify themselves as Ra. And I say they because if you don't know anything about the law of one, just a summary of what a social memory complex is. The internet is like a very early stage of a social memory complex. What I like to explain it this way. If you imagine telepathic communication evolving, and apparently, over 90% of intelligent life in the universe is telepathic, not verbal. So we're actually pretty rare in terms of how we communicate. But as we keep evolving, let's imagine like you and I, Derek, learn how to exchange feelings and impressions really accurately. So we can pick on what we're feeling really easily. And then a few hundred years later, humans can actually sort of hear what we're thinking. And then a few hundred years later, it's like we can literally talk through our minds without having to speak. Well, just imagine what would happen if that ability kept happening, kept increasing, right? It's like a type of quantum entanglement in the mind. Well, at some point, you and I have absolutely no boundaries between your mind and my mind, right? I can access all of your thoughts. You can access all of my thoughts. My feelings, memories, all of it is like an open table. And then you and I at that point are really kind of one being, right? We're sort of like one self now in two different bodies. Well, the number one necessity for telepathy, at least on the positive polarity, is to love the person that you're communicating with. So love is that quantum entanglement that allows us to connect in the quantum and exchange information. So we love one another, we sort of merge minds, but then we love other people and we want them to merge with us. And so more and more minds join into this collective field of consciousness we're creating until we get to a place where, that's the nature of love, is it doesn't want to leave anybody out. So the whole planet will eventually share one mind. We call that the collective unconscious right now. We already do share a mind. The Course in Miracles says all minds are joined. The Law of One says this as well. We just aren't aware that our minds are joined and connected, but we'll see that one day and be able to just be communicating all the time. So that's how intelligent life evolves in the universe. And Ra says we are a sixth density social memory complex, which again gets into the seven densities. We're in the third, transitioning to fourth. Ra is a civilization from the sixth. And they actually say we are the civilization that was once on Venus. And science has just caught on to this. This was channeled in the 80s. They say we were on Venus for, it was habitable for a couple of billion years. It was in the Goldilocks zone and had life and stuff. And in 2019, NASA actually confirmed this. They said, based on the data and the research, Venus was once a habitable planet for about 2 billion years. And everything Ra says totally lines up with what we know now. And they said that we came to your planet, your peoples, about 11,000 years ago. So 9,000 BC. And at that time, Egypt, the lifespan was only like 30 years. There was a lot of viruses. I don't know about virus is the right word, bacteria and stuff in the Nile River, mosquitoes transmitting stuff. So there's a lot of disease. Yeah, exactly. So people weren't living very long. And the whole point of third density is to incarnate here and choose a polarity, positive or negative, which means you have to have a lot of experience to do that. You have to experience both polarities. And if you only live 30 years, like, I don't know about you, man, but I'm 32 and I feel like I'm just barely figuring out what life's all about. So they were like, we got to help these people that are stuck in this perpetual spiritual childhood. So they came to Egypt and built the pyramids for them with their minds. Of course, they were meant to be structures for spiritual initiation. So they were like a sensory deprivation tank experience. You go into this pyramid, it's completely dark. If you've been in the pyramid, it's very disorienting. And they would lay them down, go through breathwork techniques or whatever, use crystals, and they would activate Kundalini life force, have them experience cosmic consciousness. And once the Kundalini life force is awakened in someone, they have, 10 times more energy in their system to live longer, it activates all your latent spiritual abilities, opens your awareness, gives them everything that they were needing at the time. And then they were using the pyramids to teach them how to physically heal people with crystals. So they were trying to elongate the lifespan and teach the Law of One, which says the whole universe is one being, one thought, actually. And you are all the creator, and we are the creator. We are not separate from you. But they said the people of that time took that knowledge and used it for hierarchy and power. So the elites sort of used it, as they always do, to distort it and say, we're superior to you guys and you should serve us and stuff. So when they realized, oh no, like this is being distorted and used for negative purposes, we gotta take off. And so they left Egypt. And, that's why we have the Giza pyramids that to this day, we have not the faintest clue how we could even build them today, let alone how they built them thousands of years ago. Ra actually explains all of that. So when they contacted this being, they were like, oh, your name's Ra. Are you like Ra from Egypt? And they say, essentially, but your people gave us that name. We don't call ourselves Ra, but your Egyptian people thought we were Ra, the sun god, when we came down. And so we said, no problem, call us whatever you want. And that was kind of the name they were given.
I had a dream where I was watching the pyramids being assembled by a group of people, and there was something to do with both telekinesis and sound. It was like there was like a sound instrument that was like turning the blocks into more like clay, more mushy, and then they were putting them into place, and then it would re-solidify.
Wow.
So it was like they were moving giant marshmallows.
And you dreamt this?
I did. Yeah. Is that corroborated by what the Law of One says?
Very much so. They don't speak about any sound instruments. They don't actually really give a ton of the technique they used, but they talk about the metaphysics of it. They say everything you see, all matter, is what they call intelligent energy. And intelligent infinity is sort of their term for the creator. Like, what is God? How do you describe God? The source. It's intelligent infinity. It's like, wow, that's probably the best way we could describe it. So they say, if you know how to communicate with intelligent infinity, you can communicate with the intelligent energy in the rock or anything, and you can give it a request and it will carry out the request. A rock is a first density life form. So there's no personal self in the rock to say yes or no to what's requested. So it just responds to the request as if you're the rock, right? So they did that through mind. They just say we built it through thought. So, that leaves a lot of possibilities open, but I can certainly see something like that being part of the technique.
Oh, okay, cool. You've been in the pyramids. I haven't been in the pyramids.
I actually haven't, but I have a few close friends who've been there and done the tours, and they explained their experience to me, also being Law of One fans. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of how I imagine it would be.
It's probably a good idea to just say what the densities are if people are encountering this term for the first time.
Yeah. So if you have an understanding of the chakras, you'll really have an easier time understanding the densities. The densities are like the chakras of the universe. Ra describes that each one of us are a sort of a microcosm of the macrocosm, where each one of us is a miniature universe, a miniature version of the universe, because everything the source does is fractal in nature, right? So we have 7 energy centers, which are little representations of the 7 densities of consciousness. So we can look at this as like levels of spiritual intelligence that exist in the universe. And as we activate more and more chakras, we're accessing higher levels of spiritual intelligence or consciousness. So the universe moves in this fashion through the density model. And Ra explains that the first density correlates to the root, obviously, the red ray. And it's the density of pure being, pure existence. So you might think of it like this. The source, when the source creates something, the only materials it has is itself. So it has to evolve into everything, change over time. The source doesn't just poof anything into existence, right? Everything is the product of what came before it. So consciousness begins in the universe as just existing as the 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, and space. After a few billion years of those 5 elements interacting, a planet solidifies, goes through the rock magma phase, hardens, oceans appear, and then oceans create life. Then consciousness evolves into the second density, correlating to the sacral chakra, which is the density of awareness. And that's when consciousness now can be sort of an organism, like a microbial organism or bacterial life even. And it can move, right? It can interact with its environment because now there's some kind of awareness. There's a very beginning of a self and an other, an organism and an environment. So consciousness spends another few billion years, and that's density. Microbial life, insect life, plant life, animal life, that whole spectrum is second density. And what brings the third density into existence is once consciousness becomes self-aware. And that apparently, I think dolphins probably are very self-aware, but as far as we know through science, we're the only animals who have self-awareness, meaning at some point, and I think that this happened through the advent of language. I think however many millions of years ago, our ape ancestors probably started using guttural noises to refer to objects, which is a very helpful survival adaptation, right? When we make this noise, we mean banana. This noise means danger. This noise means water. and they can start using noises to communicate with each other, well, that's going to give them a huge advantage to survive. But what it also does is it brings in the conceptual mind. So now the mind can capture an object with this thing called a word or a label. And at some point, they did that to themselves, right? They went, I'm going to give you a noise and you a noise, and every ape now has a unique noise. And once you have a noise to refer to me, now the mind does this thing, this really amazing thing, if you think about it, where it sort of flips in on itself, doing an about face, and becomes an object to itself. So I am is sort of born into reality in the mind. Once there's self-awareness, then we have the third density of consciousness. Now there's a personal self. The belief in separation is the big creation of third density. And that's why we see a lot of amazing things happen, like technology, economics, language, social hierarchy, and everything we have in our world today. And on the negative, we get war, genocide, strife, division, all that stuff. So consciousness experiences third density, apparently for only about 75,000 years. And then once consciousness starts to realize, okay, yeah, we're all in different bodies maybe, but we're all one essence. We're all actually the same energy, knowing itself, or consciousness. And that's the beginning of the fourth density, which is the density of love and oneness and unity. So it's like, hey, we're all in this together. Let's stop killing each other and fighting each other. That's a type of spiritual intelligence, right? So that's fourth density, which lasts for about 30 million years, according to the law of one. And then consciousness moves to the fifth density, correlating to the throat chakra. And that's the density of wisdom or light. And that's a density where the soul spends a lot more time in isolation, whereas in fourth density, it's all about group unity and service to others, traveling the universe to be of service to other planets, trying to bring more harmony and balance to things. Fifth density is sort of like you're going to spend time more by yourself, understanding the nature of reality, the nature of light, the nature of time and space. Incredible psychic abilities develop. Fifth density is where the body becomes a light body, because the vibration of consciousness is so insanely high that it has to, the body that conducts that consciousness has to be pure electromagnetic energy. So that's fifth density. Sixth density is where Ra exists. And that's what they call the law of one density, or the density of unity, where love and wisdom, fourth and fifth density, have to find a perfect balance, which is apparently really difficult to do because our souls tend to gravitate towards one or the other. And so that's where the higher self is born as well, where part of your learning in sixth density to achieve that perfect balance of love and wisdom, like a mother and a father raising a child in a sense, you become the higher self, which means the soul kind of has gained all of the karmic experience it can have through first through sixth, and it needs to sort of up the ante now to keep evolving or polarizing. So what it does is says, I'm going to become a guide to all my previous lifetimes. And so it turns back in time and sort of re-experiences every life it's ever lived from the other side of the curtain, and provides itself with certain catalysts and learning opportunities, and sort of tries to guide the route, which means you have to have a good balance of love and wisdom, because love wants to give, it wants to help, it wants to heal. But the universe works differently, right? There's learning that happens through suffering and through challenge and trials. So we don't want to always just rush to save everybody from their problems, right? There's a balance of like letting someone, really, it's like trusting the universe actually, to let someone be given the lessons they need. So that's what you do in sixth density. Once you complete your time as the higher self, you evolve to the seventh density, which they call the gateway density. And they say, we don't actually have much to report to you about this density because we haven't been there yet. But they do say they have guides and teachers from that density who help them out. And the closest we can describe it is like you have 1 foot still in manifestation and 1 foot in the allness of eternity of the creator. And you're sort of like right before you merge back, you're still reaching out a hand to the universe to be of help and service. And then that merging happens back to the source. And that's one entire cycle of the universe. And so Ra says, just like there's 7 notes on the musical scale, and when you hit the 8th note, you're starting the next octave. They say that's how the universe works. So once the universe evolves through all 7 densities, everything collapses back into the singularity. And then boom, another universe is born, which uses all of the data and information from the previous universe to create the next experiment. And so for that reason, Ra actually doesn't call them universes. They call them octaves. They say in this octave, da, 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 da. And they liken that expansion and contraction of every universe. They say that's like the heartbeat of the creator. So it's a really amazing model.
Wow. And I totally get, I've learned, I understood it a little bit, and I've learned more just from you describing it. And I totally get what you mean when you're talking about, oh yeah, that's feeling so how it's obvious that that's how it should
You
be.
remember it. Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. And I love the connection with the music and the harmonics. I notice every time you talk about worshiping, you play an air guitar also.
I do, yeah. I did play piano too, though, but guitar was always my main shtick.
Yeah. Wow, I'm not exactly sure where to go from that. That was a really fantastic.
How do you move on from that, right?
How do you move on from that?
We just described the nature of the universe. What do you want to talk about next?
Well, okay, let's actually go totally the opposite direction. A total non sequitur. Let's talk about our physical bodies. I know you were working at Google bodybuilding, or you were in the fitness industry, and I noticed you seem to be keeping up with that to some degree. Why do you continue to like work on your physical body, given all that you know about all this spiritual stuff?
Yeah, I love this question, man. This is a question I get asked pretty often. And people will say, well, I know for a fact that Aaron isn't enlightened because he works out. And I don't think I'm enlightened, but like, it's just a funny thing for someone to say, because to me, it represents the way that the mind just fundamentally can't understand enlightenment or liberation or non-duality, if we want to say it that way. Because to me, I see a lot of people in the non-duality community, like using non-duality as a reason to make things invalid. Like, well, the body doesn't exist, so screw it. If you even spend time on it, you're stuck in duality. And what I like to say is, oh no, it's quite the opposite. A true non-dual awareness makes everything valid, because it shows you that, first of all, nothing's a mistake, right? Like the source wouldn't have put us in bodies if it was some giant accident or something, and we shouldn't pay any attention to it. No, the body is a teaching device. It's here for our evolution and learning. So the difference between the way the character known as Aaron works out now versus, 10 years ago or something, is that before it was all about my identity. My self-worth was wrapped up in my appearance. And because of that, I was very abusive to my body. I would work out at least 6 days a week, usually 7. Hard to take an off day, when your whole sense of self-worth is based on how you look. And if I had to miss a day, I would be very upset, frustrated, stressed out. I'm losing my progress. I was competing in CrossFit. I then competed in bodybuilding. So there was a lot of things at stake in terms of how my physical body looked. But again, because of that, I was very abusive to it. I wouldn't listen to it. I would get injured all the time and work through it. And my diet was not healthy, but it was to the extent that it could help me get big muscles and be strong. And I didn't really care about what I was putting in my body to that extent. As long as I look shredded is all I care about. So now I work out about 4, sometimes 5 days a week, simply because I love this body so much because of what it allows me to experience. How could I experience any of the things I've experienced in this life without a body? The body is a sacred extension of what I am. And when you know the body is this incredibly faithful servant, right? It's just every second it's beating my heart, it's digesting my food. I don't even know how I open and close my hand, for crying out loud. The body is like my best friend, right? It's allowing me to be here and be happy and experience the amazing magic of the universe. Why would I abuse that? Why would I neglect that? Why would I ignore that? So that's how everything sort of becomes when love takes the wheel, when love is leading your state of consciousness, or the heart rather than the mind. You find that everything is lovable. And so when you love your body, for me, it just sort of fell away. It wasn't something I've ever tried to do in terms of like cleaning up my diet and eating healthy. It was just like, man, I can't keep putting these things in my body I know are toxic, because my body tells me when it is, right? I get brain fog. I can't sleep as well, diarrhea, indigestion, all these things can happen. And it's like, this is my body's way, because my body can't talk, right? It's my body's way of saying, hey, man, you're putting things in me that are really hard for me. It's not what I'm meant to eat or take in. And so I just started wanting to eat healthy because I loved my body and I didn't want to see it suffer. And see, there's already a disidentification from the body. And even the way I'm talking, it's like when you become unidentified as the body, you actually can love the body for the first time. But when you're identified with it, my sense of worth is the body. As I age and grow old and the wrinkles appear, damn it, body, you're making me look ugly. Like, I hate you so much. Like, I'm gonna whip you back into shape. It's just very abusive. So I don't think you can truly love your body if you think you are the body.
And I'm totally remembering times in my life when I was competing, in college running or cycling. And it was like, if I missed a day, I would be so distraught, with the losing 24 hours of fitness.
Exactly. It sounds weird to say that, but that's how it felt.
Is there a correlation between physical strength and power in a spiritual sense? Like, does having a strong, healthy body give you a foundation for other practices?
In my experience, absolutely yes. And if you read, the Vedas, the Sutras, or the Upanishads, any of the Eastern texts, you'll come across this every so often, where they say a healthy physical body is of great value for spiritual seeking, which really just makes sense, right? If you have tons of brain fog, your neurochemical balance is screwed up and you're in negative states of being all the time, how can you really evolve much in that state? It's very difficult. But if your mind is sharp and clear and harmonized with the environment and firing on all cylinders, you better believe spiritual revelation is going to happen easier. The body's the conduit for the mind. It's the extension of the mind. So you can't expect to disconnect yourself from any realm of reality and have benefits from that, right? To me, the benefits always come from more connection, more harmonizing and balancing of things. So I don't think we should necessarily be hyper obsessed with our health to the extent that like we're not even able to enjoy a cheat meal or something. But it all just finds its natural balance when your mind becomes balanced, right? You're able to give yourself permission to enjoy food for pleasure every so often, but you know that fundamentally food's not meant for pleasure, it's meant for health, and the body needs food. So to me, it just kind of happens as a natural result.
And given that you and I are both in male bodies, what's your understanding of being the masculine energy in a male body? Like, how do you, what's the context in your life for that?
Well, I just love talking about polarity and the masculine and the feminine. I find the interactions and the balances between masculine and feminine, I mean, it's what makes the whole universe, first of all. That's pretty amazing. But to access that within myself, activating the feminine essence in myself super accelerates the masculine, the mind training and the perceptions and awareness. They really play well best together, not separate. And I think that that's actually one of the biggest hangups for people who are spiritually seeking, is that they'll either choose a masculine or a feminine modality. So they'll either study Buddhism or non-duality, and they'll just do heavy, mind training and lots of silent meditation, which is great, but they won't do any cultivation of energy, shadow work, chakra activation, chakra balancing. They don't do that stuff because it's seen as not valid from the non-duality framework. And for me, I felt like I struck gold, man, when I started doing both at the same time, studying non-duality, working on rewiring my perceptions, but also activating the Kundalini energy and doing, breath work every day, chakra activation every morning. I sit right on this cushion behind me and do about a 45-minute chakra activation and breath work meditation. And I get into these incredibly high states of bliss and God union, and really the experience I had at 27. And I wasn't getting that when I was just studying non-duality. So the synergy between the two is what's really interesting to me and what I'm really excited about teaching more about on my YouTube channel.
Yeah, that's thanks for sharing that practice. And have you discovered or opened up your access to any superhuman abilities from your practice?
It's a great question. I think I would say I haven't had much opportunity to know if they're more active because I'm so isolated where I live right now and with COVID and stuff. But my dream is to open a spiritual center. I hope to do that in the next few years. We're going to be moving down to Austin actually in a couple of months. And I have a ton of friends down there with a huge thriving community that I'm really excited to plug into, because I think you kind of need to be in community with others to activate those giftings more. But one that particularly has always been a passion of mine is healing, because I grew up in my church, which we did just enormous amounts of physical healing. We have these miracle services. We call them revivals back in the day, where we would get into these worship services where we would we would whip up so much energy in that room, just seeking the divine with one mind, one intention together. And Kundalini activations would manifest. I was talking to my dad about this a couple nights ago. I was like, Dad, remember how people would just flop on the floor all the time and be writhing like this? He's like, yeah, it would happen all the time. And I was like, that was a Kundalini activation. We just didn't know what to call it. We just called it falling under the power, is what we would say. So we would have Kundalini activations and we would have these incredible miracles, people with cancer, deafness, blindness, legs or limbs shorter than one another, just being healed all the time. It was like normal in my life growing up to see physical healing. And as a kid, I would pray for people all the time and heal blindness, eyesight issues, deafness, heart disease. And I was just like a little kid who, children tend to have the best ability to heal. And people would just come up and ask me to pray for them. So that was, one of my first memories from 5 years on, praying for healing. And that was normal to me at that age. And then that kind of fell away as I grew older, and especially once I left Christianity. But it was always the one thing, even when I went through my sort of closet atheist phase where I was like, I don't know if there's a God or not. But what I can't deny are the crazy miracles I saw in my church growing up. That definitely wasn't fake, but I need an explanation for what it was, because I know now that what it wasn't was, please God, please do a nice thing and heal this person. And God's in a good mood and decides to do it. That doesn't make sense. So understanding the Kundalini energy and how it activates psychic abilities has made sense of all of that now. And so I've been working on practicing healing, like on my fiance, sometimes on my parents or my sister. And there's been really great success, even recently in doing that. But the hallmark is that when you pull energy through breath work and like Kriya or Kundalini yoga, you start to activate that energy and can feel it physically in your body, traveling up the spine, up the back of the neck, up to the crown, third eye. And it's just like buzzing inside of you. And in my meditation, I noticed it would come out in my hands. It'd be really strong in my hands. And I thought, that must be where the energy wants to be released from. And as Ra teaches in the Law of One, healing is really when you are offering someone else an opportunity for a reconfiguration of energy. And so of their free will, they have to accept it, which is why some people would get healed and some wouldn't, because there might be blockages in their chakras. There might be unbelief where they don't feel like physical healing is true, or there might be unworthiness, right? Where they have a lot of sins they feel guilty for, and God's not going to heal me because I'm a bad, bad boy. So when you get all that bullshit out of the way, you can just know, hey, energy is offering you a reconfiguration, do you accept? And if in their heart they say yes to it from a place of love, it's called green ray energy. The heart chakra is the color green. You send green ray energy into their body and it goes to the area of sickness or illness and it reconfigurates the energy there. And we call that healing. So it's actually a very scientific thing that's happening. We just haven't really learned how to, on a global scale at least, haven't learned how to access that ability yet.
Yeah, I'm kind of approaching these things personally from like, let's just see what I can already do without any like training, or with like very minimal training, like watch one YouTube video about telekinesis and then go try it, or have someone teach me telepathy, and it's quite astounding. Telepathy got it the first time, telekinesis got it the first time. It's harder to be consistent with it,
right?
But it's so cool. You know, I just we went through the Reiki process of getting attuned to Reiki, and we're Reiki masters, my wife and I now. And like, I know
so
what
cool.
you're saying. You feel the buzzing in your hands, and you're like, I gotta put this somewhere.
That's how you know it's time to heal. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so wild that you know, anybody that hasn't experienced it, would be just like, you can't know it until you experience it, really, I don't think.
Absolutely.
What's up with Austin? Everyone's going there. Why is Austin attracting this, I don't know, all the most influential people these days?
Yeah, it's truly remarkable. I don't know why, but I just got to the point where I couldn't resist it anymore, because literally all of my friends are down there. And in Denver, I love Denver. I love Colorado. I've met some cool people here, but we don't have any real life friends here that we can connect with and have a community with. And COVID has had a big part to play with that. But, you know, many of our friends already live in Austin. I've had 2 or 3 very close friends of mine move there in the last year. And then I just found out one of my best friends, Alex Zek, if you know who that is, he and his wife just bought a house down there. And so we were like, all right, that's it. We're out of here. We're going to Austin. Universe is doing something cool down there, so we got to check it out.
Yeah, we're in that same phase, you know, St. Louis. I do think the pandemic has just made a lot of people just not want to say yes to doing fun things.
Yeah.
But I've been so many places, Ubud, Bali. We were nomads for 6 years, where you can easily find a community. Yeah. There's always something you want to do with somebody you want to do it with, and not having that it's a huge contrast for sure.
Yeah, I think we're meant for community. I don't think it's not the way the universe intended us to live, at least on the positive polarity, to be isolated and stuck in our little bubble world separate from one another. I think that actually really slows down evolution. It slows down my spiritual evolution, which is how I know that it probably slows down evolution in general for humanity. When we come together, we sharpen each other, we learn from one another, we come up with ideas. Ra actually calls this, in the law of one, they call it the doubling effect. They say whenever 2 or more people put their minds or intentions together to seek the creator, which could be anything, right? To invent something new, to help humanity, to build something, whatever. They say there's a doubling effect, which doesn't mean times 2, it means to the power of. So it's like squared. So if I can create 100 energy, you and I together can create 1,000, right?
It totally makes sense that, and I don't actually know much about the negative versus positive polarities, but if the negative polarity wanted to slow down evolution, that they would craft a scenario where people had to be by themselves.
Yep. And to not many people's shock anymore, we are learning that our planet, although it is far more filled with far more positively oriented beings than negative, our planet is sort of captured at this point by service to self or negatively polarized beings who have very different intentions with where they want to take this planet than we would like to take it. And so we're really witnessing this amazing great awakening right now, where humanity is learning the power of unity that we have all of the power. And when we come together, there's nothing we can't do. And there's nothing the negative polarity can do to us when we stand together. But as long as they keep us divided, they can conquer us and move us like chess pieces on their board. So it's a beautiful time to be alive. And I think we'll look back at the Justin Trudeau's of the world right now and say, thank you, teacher, for teaching us the power of unity.
Mm. It's a nice way to look at it. I think because so many people just, and I do too, just get into frustration and like wanting things to be different right away.
Yeah, which is understandable.
We wanted to talk about, we were chatting beforehand, spiritual intelligence, and I want to segue into that, this new modality you've been working on, with a little story for you. My son goes to a school based on Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, of which there are 8 currently sort of described: interpersonal, intrapersonal, kinesthetic, musical, linguistic, mathematical, different ways that we learn and interact with our world. And I just a few weeks ago had the sense that I should add a 9th intelligence to this, which would be called cosmic intelligence, which would be the sense.
Dude, it's coming through the ether, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's getting downloaded. That's amazing.
And so I was trying to think of fun little games that so these are elementary kids. I could have them practice telepathy, telephone, or I could have them practice moving little pieces of paper with their minds, or I could.
That's so rad, man.
Yeah. Just make it fun. That sounds like it's a little bit different than what you're talking about in terms of spiritual intelligence, but maybe you could talk about what it is that this framework you've come up with and why you're excited about it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's as you might see, it's actually very much the same thing. The way that this came through for me was actually meeting my fiance about 1.5 years ago. She did not grow up spiritual at all. She did not grow up religious at all. She's what you might call an old soul. And when I met her, I was very surprised to hear that she didn't have any kind of spiritual background or religious background. She found Christianity at about 17 years old, I think. And this is just so classic old soul. She showed up to a church service because she was craving community and she wanted to connect with God. She always believed there was a God. And she would listen to the preacher, and just be like, oh, I don't resonate with all this separation stuff. But man, I love these worship services. So she would just go to church just to worship God and started listening to worship music and stuff. But she was like, Jesus died for my sins. I don't know about all that, but I love connecting with God. And so as I started to get to know her, she was just like the most grounded woman I'd ever dated. She would handle really intense situations with incredible patience and kindness. And I'd never seen her in 1.5 years we've been together. I've never seen her truly get angry at anything. And so I just said to her one day, like, I don't know if you know this, babe, but you have like a really high spiritual IQ. And I've thought about this question for a long time, because when I worked at Google, I was working with these software engineers, training them, who were just incredibly intelligent on the IQ scale, genius level for sure.
Yeah.
But they could barely interact socially. They didn't have much EQ at all. And I found that to be interesting, because it's like, well, you think that this person's smart, but they're almost mentally handicapped when it comes to social intelligence. I would, for example, like I had multiple clients who would do things like this. You just say, hey, brother, how was your weekend? When they would come in the gym, and they stop and they blink and stare at the ground. And then they look up and they say, it was good. And it took them like 10 seconds to think of that. And for the longest time, I didn't understand what was going on. But I started to realize that what they're doing is they're so always in this linear intelligence mode that when they are asked a simple question to connect with them emotionally, they don't see it as an opportunity for emotional connection. They see it as an opportunity to exchange information. So they think, what's the most accurate possible response I can make? So they have to go through the options in a linear fashion to think of what's the most accurate answer. And it ends up just being good. Good was the answer.
There's not much information there anyway.
Exactly. So it's like, oh, they're sort of stuck, right, in this one mode of intelligence. So I started thinking like, clearly there's other modes of intelligence, not just IQ. What are they? And what could we say there's such a thing as a spiritual intelligence? Because that seems very obvious to me that, the example I give in my video is like, you can be able to solve trigonometry equations in your head. You can be so intelligent intellectually, but have almost no self-awareness, right? Have a huge ego, be totally identified with your body, not aware of your habits at all or conditioning patterns. And so in thinking about what this question of what is spiritual intelligence, for the longest time, my answer would be, well, it's self-awareness. That's spiritual intelligence. And I think that that's a very good answer, and it's really close to the truth, but it sort of doesn't equate to one phenomenon, which is sort of like my fiance of this person doesn't know any spiritual concepts. They've never heard non-duality before, but they have this innate ability to be aware of themselves and to integrate what they're aware of. So like, even children sometimes they haven't studied any non-duality texts yet, but they have this really innate ability to be self-aware and to integrate that awareness. So I ended up arriving at the definition of spiritual intelligence is the capacity for self-awareness and integration. So it's like the capacity for the masculine and the feminine. Some people have studied non-duality for 20 years and they're very self-aware, but it took them 20 years to get that self-aware. And I just met, someone yesterday who doesn't have any spiritual background and they're pretty much on that same level of self-awareness. So how do I explain that? How do I describe that? The word capacity really resonates. And I think that probably has a lot to do with past lives and karmic experience, but clearly that is a different type of intelligence, not just to be self-aware, but to integrate and embody what you're aware of is also part of the equation, because one person might become aware of some negative pattern and take 2 years to fully integrate that. And another person takes 2 months to integrate that. So there's kind of two things we need to consider when we talk about it.
Yeah, so I'm hearing like your fiance like didn't have this conscious awareness of her spiritual intelligence, but she just had developed it and was using it, but didn't
even know she was using it. Yeah, it just didn't make sense to her to stress out about things when negative thoughts. I would ask her these questions like, how do you deal like with negative thoughts? Because her family environment she grew up in was very negative. Her mom and sister are very much young souls, extremely identified with ego, lost in stories. And they would always look at her as like she was the most immature one because she wouldn't get involved in their stories and didn't care about all the drama. And I was like, oh no, it's very much the opposite, right? You're probably a very old soul who incarnated into a family of younger souls. And she was like, wow, that actually makes sense. I never knew that was a thing,
Yeah, that's super cool that you get to be with someone that helps you form a theory like this or form a framework.
Definitely, yes.
How do you plan to teach this, or like what's the use of this framework?
Great question. So the way I see it is, for number one, it's sort of a new, as you said, a new framework for the enlightenment path that I've been interested in a while to try and find some new terminology that's not as scary sounding to people, like enlightenment. People hear that word and whether they know it or not, a big part of their mind sort of immediately will exclude them from the possibility, right? Well, enlightenment, well, God, it's like the state the Buddha attained. I don't know if that's possible for somebody like me, right? And so I wanted to come up with new language that doesn't carry those limiting beliefs with it, because the mind just wants to compare. So let's take the comparisons out. Let's look at it from a different framework. Let's not call it self-realization, which sounds like some crazy cosmic consciousness thing. Let's just look at it through the lens of self-mastery, right? I just want to master my state of being, master my mind and my energy. And hey, that doesn't sound so impossible, right? After all, like there's nothing you're closer to than your own self. So if you're going to master anything, probably your own self is the most reasonable thing to master. Yeah. So I I used a lot of the Law of One teachings on the chakras and some other models like the David Hawkins scale of consciousness, a lot of Vedantic Hinduism, and one of my other favorite things to study, which is the science of brainwave states. Just my understanding of all these different modalities kind of helped to connect the dots and say, hey, they're all saying the same thing, that there are sort of levels of awareness that we access as we increase our spiritual intelligence. So I thought, well, I need to be able to show a map of spiritual intelligence or an SQ scale. So I really just took the IQ scale, which most models are 0 to 200. And there's people who've gone above 200, right? High 250s and beyond, but that's extraordinarily rare. So for practical reasons, let's just say 0 to 200, 100 being the average. I think 120 is very intelligent, and above 120, I think 140 is like genius level. So I said, let's make an SQ scale that correlates to the same degree of the IQ scale, meaning if we hear someone has an SQ of 120, we should know that that means right away, oh, that's a very spiritually intelligent person. If they have an SQ of 150, we know, oh, that's an enlightened person, right? So I use different words, but I map it up to the chakras. So the root chakra starts at 50, and that's the state of insanity or full body identification. So the SQ scale shows the different states of spiritual intelligence. So the lowest state is insanity, root chakra. You could think of it like if the root chakra is left all by itself and it doesn't have help from any of the other 6, you're in a state of insanity, right? It needs to be endowed with the other chakras as well. So sacral chakra is the state of sanity, and that's between 50 and 75. And that's where most people are, maybe not even most, but the average SQ on our planet is somewhere between 45 to 50. So our SQ is way behind our IQ is what that means. Third chakra is solar plexus. That's from 76 to 100. And that's the level of empowerment. So that's when someone at the root chakra level, you're not even interested in personal growth yet. It's like you're just in fight or flight mode, survival mode, full, like everything's about just getting pleasure and avoiding pain. You don't care about developing some great career or life path. You just want to survive the day and you're suffering a lot. Sanity, the level of the sacral chakra, is when you're starting to be interested in personal growth. Maybe you want to start a business, make a name for yourself or a life for yourself, and you're on a path of trying to improve yourself. The yellow ray, 76 to 100, is the level of empowerment, and that's the level where somebody gets interested in like law of attraction and creating their reality and manifesting things. And a bit of that spiritual element is starting to be introduced. And then that leads to the fourth chakra, which is 101 to 125. That's the level of awakening. When you say someone's awakening, that's the moving into the heart chakra level where you're awakening to oneness, right? Awakening to love and unity. Moving up from there is 126 to 150 is the throat chakra. And that's the state of illumination, which is just another word for enlightenment. And that's where you reach a level of intelligence where you sort of have transcended duality. You know, there's really not two separate things in this universe. There's just one thing. And so you live with a lot of inner peace, inner stillness, and you're more interested in knowing yourself than the external world. From there, we move to the third eye level, 151 to 175. And that's the level of mastery, the level of the sage or the saint or the enlightened being. And from 176 to 200 is the state of mastery. From 200, which is crown chakra and above, that's the state of, I just call it singularity, which is like total God intoxication, the level of Christ or the Buddha. People speak sort of like they're God at that level. So that's kind of how I map it out. And it's just to give us a reference frame for where you're at. Mm-hmm. Once you know where you're at in this new model, I'm going to give every level sort of the tools to know, here's what this experience is like. And then here's how you transcend this level. Here's the things to begin focusing on and working towards to get to the next level of SQ. So it's a way to help people see where they're at and sort of map their progress and to have the tools to know how to transcend to the next level of SQ.
Oh, it's really, yeah, I love it. And you can, and like I could, like anyone listening can sort of like peg themselves of where they are. Like, I think I'm probably in this range. Right. This just reminded me of Roger Hamilton has a scale of consciousness applied to business. It's like a
Mm.
wealth. What does he call it? But it's like based on the colors. I think there's 9 levels instead of 7. But it's like how you're viewing the world and your level of consciousness in terms of like how you can make things happen in physical reality, like how you can mobilize essentially your will to create in the world, and
Hmm.
like what's the difference between a billionaire and a millionaire and a someone working for a wage in terms of like
Mm.
their level of consciousness.
Yeah.
Really,
Yeah. I
really
mean,
interesting.
a lot of success in business depends on your SQ level, right? It's like your ability to see behind the surface layer of things and tap into the realm of energy of what's causing things to happen in the business and the niche that you're in, and then play to that energy. I think anyone who's truly successful in business like that has to have a certain level of SQ to get there.
Mm. And I was also aware, and I just want to acknowledge you for like, there's a moment, and a lot of people that I interview, when they've learned so much, they get to the cutting edge, like where they know more than anybody, and then they can be creative from there. And so
Mm-hmm.
like seeing you like okay, well, I'm just going to map uh the SQ scale on the IQ scale. Like that's just a fun creative thing, just to go to the adjacent possible and apply your knowledge. And so I just want to acknowledge you for stepping into this sort of creative phase of your teaching work rather than just like explaining someone else's work.
Mm. Thank you, man. That's a very great compliment to hear from someone, and that is very much how it feels. It feels like I think what I really give credit to is the feminine activation of the Kundalini energy. You know, they say when you activate it, it kind of just puts you into more of a genius mode where your intelligence and awareness open up to whatever you're good at or whatever you enjoy, and you can just start connecting more dots. It just happens. It doesn't feel like you're doing it. It doesn't feel like I came up with this. It feels like it was just given to me by a higher intelligence. It was literally one night when, you know how it is, you just get into a flow state of some kind and there's a download starts happening, and I couldn't even keep up with it. It was coming in so fast. And it was also like I didn't even know what it was until I went back and looked at it. And I was like,
Mm,
wow, it's a new language system. It's a new map or framework to understand this. And then even another thing that I'm going to be teaching is the 3 levels of mastery, which we can even divide mastery into sort of 3 stages.
mm,
The first stage begins at the throat chakra, which I call the I am state, because it's the state of mind heart coherence. And you can practice these states of mastery at any level of SQ. Anyone can practice mind heart coherence. But what it means is that at a 150 level of SQ, you're permanently in that state. It's natural and default. You don't have to practice it at all. And that's the first state of mastery. So I is mind or consciousness, am is heart or existence. When the two are synced up, you're basically living in sort of a meditative state from the heart where you're very still on the inside. You don't want anything from the external world. You just want to be in that state of connection. And that's the I am state. The second state of mastery is the flow state, which correlates to the third eye, 175. And in Hinduism, they call it non-doership. And what it means is that it doesn't mean that you're always playing a sport or surfing, right? It means that your physical body has merged with the flow of life to such an extent that it's like you're in a flow state all the time. You don't have a sense of really doing anything. You have a sense of I'm being lived by the universe, right? There's no person in here apart from the universe anymore. You're always in a flow state. So if you can imagine, if you can capture the last time you were in a flow state, doing something you love, maybe cycling, try to capture that quality of consciousness and just imagine, what if I was in that quality of consciousness all the time, right? Really inwardly relaxed and still, very merged with what is happening now, the present moment, and just finding a lot of pleasure from what is. That's the flow state, essentially. And at a 175 SQ, somebody is permanently in that state. So you can practice the flow state at any level of SQ, but the higher up you move, the more natural it becomes. And then at 200 and higher, that's called the channeling state, which doesn't mean you're always talking to extraterrestrials or deceased relatives. It means that you are completely tapped into the field of higher consciousness. So somebody who has a 200 or higher SQ, they sound like they're channeling when they talk. Everything is incredibly profound because they're so dialed in. They don't have to get into a trance to channel something. It's like they're always sort of like Christ or the Buddha. Every word out of their mouth is incredibly profound and full of wisdom. That represents like a 200 level of SQ, or the channeling state.
It's amusing. I know one person kind of like that, and everything they say is so profound, but it's always so simple. And
yes,
like you always just be like, why am I trying to complicate it? It's, I'll ask them questions like, what should I do with this or that? And they're like, whatever you want. I'm like, all right, you're just, of course, but
oh, you make it sound so easy. Yeah.
I'm excited to. So you're working on a series of videos about this. Is that what you're doing right now?
Yeah. Last week was sort of the first unveiling of episode 1, which was just what is spiritual intelligence, which we kind of already went into. And then today I'm actually posting episode 2, which is called The State of Mastery, which goes into what mastery is. So mastery, as a definition, is the ability to create the most desirable state of consciousness for any given situation at will. So it's the ability to be in your chosen state of being, regardless of the circumstance. That's a simple definition of what mastery means. So immediately it sort of invites you into it, right? You're like, oh, that doesn't sound so far-fetched. I feel like I could get to that state with enough practice and cultivation. But then within mastery itself, there's sort of 3 levels, which we just went through. So today's video, I'm just going to be explaining all of that, which we sort of already went over.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm excited. I have one final question, and then I want to leave space for you to, say whatever you think is important. But given that humans are at so many different levels, and we've got positively polarized people and negatively polarized people, but I think a lot of positively polarized people want to fix our problems. They want Earth to feel better, society, all these things. Like, so what do you think is the number one thing we as humanity sort of need to do to fix what's wrong right now?
That, my friend, is a great question. There's many things we could say, right? There's a lot of great things, great areas we could begin focusing to really start improving things. If I had to say, like, how would I summarize the best message I could give humanity? I would say that unity right now is what seems to be awakening in the collective consciousness. And so I think that really teaching people, helping the world understand how important unity is probably the best thing we could be doing right now, because we've been so divided by our world leaders and media outlets that want to control the population. And the best way to control is to first divide, because a united population is a very strong population. You could think of it like a crystal, right? I actually have one right here. A crystal is one element perfectly united. If you look at like the molecular structure of a crystal, it's perfectly balanced.
Out, yeah.
Yes, and that's what makes a crystal strong without effort. That's what makes it conduct light. That's what makes it beautiful to behold. That's what humanity can become, like a living crystal on this planet, if we come together, learn to love one another, learn to not only respect our differences, but love our differences. I love that everyone's not Aaron Abke. What a boring world would it be if everyone was me? I'm so glad there's people of every skin color, every ethnicity, genders, you name it, right? We should be celebrating our differences, which can become a point of unity rather than division. And I think we've seen, the brilliance on behalf of the negatively polarized beings on this planet using our differences to divide us. It can just as easily flip over and become a point of unity if we can see the beauty behind it. So there's really, it's not a complicated shift. It just requires us to wake up and see, hey, we're really headed towards our own extinction if we don't start changing the way we see ourselves. And the more people become happy and love themselves and get into that mind heart coherence, happiness is the I am state, really. It's mind heart coherence. It actually has a collective effect on the planet, the collective consciousness. And this has been measured, right, by heart math. Even the 9/11, the famous 9/11 graph, where they show the Earth's magnetic field graph, and it has kind of a heartbeat of its own. And on September 11th, it spiked, like 50% higher than it does, because the emotional state of humanity affected the Earth's magnetic field. It's all connected. It's all one. It's really just a reflection of us, right? So if we start loving one another, being kind to one another, and being happy, the Earth's magnetic field is going to become so harmonized and polarized positively that we're just going to watch corruption disappear off the planet, because no one's going to resonate with it anymore. I don't want to support something that harms my fellow man. I love them. So, it's easy to say all that, right? Harder to do it. But I think each one of us stepping into our passion, being authentic, giving value to the world is the number one most important thing. Because as you give value, you get back value. That's the law of attraction. And you make the world a better place. You give people permission to be in their passion, do what they love to do. And that's what's going to create a harmonious world, in my estimation.
Again, very simple and straightforward. It just takes the intent. Like, I'm gonna practice this. I'm gonna live it. I'm gonna be happy. I'm gonna do my part in this.
Yeah, which is why I'm a very big proponent of social activism, justice, peaceful non-compliance, and raising awareness, raising our voice about what we think is unjust. That's all important, absolutely. But what's most important is my own spiritual development, right? What's more important is for me to be happy, for me to be in alignment with who I am, because then I'm actually putting out an energy that's contagious and affecting the whole of humanity. This is why I love David Hawkins' work so much, because when he calibrated the map of consciousness using applied kinesiology and found this map, well, what the map shows is that the progression of consciousness on the positive polarity, he calls it power versus force, positive, negative. Force is like manipulation, deceit, trickery, craftiness, right? That's how the negative path wins and polarizes. They have to trick you into doing something against your own best interest. Well, the positive path is power. So it's like gravity. It's attractive. It pulls everything into itself and makes everything like itself. Love is the perfect example. When you truly feel loved, what does it make you do? You want to love in return. You want to be loving. It transforms you into its image. So power is way, way more attractive, but that's why the negative path has to keep it so divided, because the minute it comes together, it can create so much momentum that the game over, So David Hawkins says that at a 500 out of 1,000 level, that's the level of love. David Hawkins says that when you're in that state of love at a 500 calibration, you are producing so much energy that you are actually, one person at 500 is offsetting the amount of energy being produced by 750,000 people calibrating under 200, or the level of force, which is quite remarkable, right? That's an amazing difference. But it's because those lower levels of consciousness produce such little energy, fear, shame, anger, division, victimization. It's such a low vibration that somebody who's truly calibrating at unconditional love, it takes 750,000 people in those states to produce the same amount of energy as one person. Wow. Who's calibrating at love. So it's like, when we know that, it gives us an immediate desire to expand our consciousness, because we know we can have such a profound impact just by our very state of being.
Yeah, that's it gives permission for people to not have to like run out and serve in an active way necessarily, but just like make sure you're you've optimized your own.
Mm-hmm.
Which, as I'm saying it, like I don't want people to think I'm like forget about everyone else and just be selfish, because I know that's another sort of trap that people can fall into. Yeah, that's cool. You know, the logarithmic scale of all these things becomes apparent. Where would you like to point the audience to learn more about you, or you can plug anything you like?
Yeah, honestly, man, I'm so excited and just buzzing about this new series I've been working on, and it's felt sort of like being pregnant or something. And I just would wanted to give birth to this thing for months now, and it feels so great to finally get it out. I have an entire year's worth of content ready, to be
Wow.
producing for the rest of this year, and I think this is really going to be what I'm going to mostly focus on in my own career in terms of like retreat formats and books and all these things. It feels like a very sort of sacred methodology that was given to me to help people understand the enlightenment path in a much simpler way, in a much less intimidating way. And so I would just invite people to check it out. If you go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Aaron Abke, and then I have everything kind of categorized into playlists, all my different series. So I have a Law of One series, A Course in Miracles, Mystical Jesus, and you'll find Spiritual Intelligence there. And that's where I'm going to be uploading every weekly episode and just kind of taking you step by step through understanding this new framework. And I think as people understand it, it's going to really ignite an excitement in people to pursue their spiritual development, because I'm going to be giving people the tools. I have a course I'm working on called Meditation Mastery that's going to go kind of in conjunction with this series. And I'm going to make that very easily and readily available for people who really want to dive into this work. So yeah, check it out. I think it's going to be something that's going to really impact you in a way that maybe people don't expect when it comes to enlightenment, that it's not just so linear or excluded just to the masculine things of like non-duality and Buddhism, but you can really achieve the same things through intimacy with your own energy, through breath work and Kriya and Kundalini. And this methodology combines the two together in such a fun way. So I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, I'm excited too. And yeah, I'm sure it'll be a success, and probably in ways that you don't even know yet. So that's exciting.
Probably, yes.
Yeah. Well, Aaron, thanks so much for coming on the show. It was great to connect with you and have access to all the things you've discovered through the years. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, brother. It's been such a blast talking with you, and I really appreciate the time, man.
All right. Talk soon. Great.
Nice.
I know you got to run, but yeah, would love to stay in touch. I've got some people in Austin to connect you with.
Oh, very cool.
I had James Hart on my show. He's the like godfather of brainwave research.
Oh, wow.
Might like to meet him.
I got to check him out for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I would love to just continue being friends. And
same, man. Absolutely. And I was going to say, what I like to do for podcasts that I go on is to sort of give back by finding like a 10-minute clip from that conversation and post it on my channel. Yeah. And then I can link to the full episode on whatever channels you want. So would love to do that as well.
Yeah. Do you have a sense of what clip would be the juiciest?
The whole interview was so good, man. It was such a fun conversation. So I could probably even post more than one clip, a couple weeks apart. My family or channel loves the Law of One so much. They just eat up that content. So I'll probably post the 7 densities explanation or something like that. But even like the mystical Jesus stuff we got into at the beginning would be really great. So
you want the whole interview and you can take the clips, or do you want me to send you clips from?
Oh yeah, you can just send me the video and I'll just kind of figure out what resonates the most.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll do.
Cool, man. You put them on YouTube, right? I've seen your YouTube channel.
Yes.
Do you just do clips and the full episodes on your podcast?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
That's our current strategy, but
I like it.
We're expanding. So
nice.
Cool.
Well, I'll link to your YouTube, and then you can just send me all your podcast links for like Spotify and iTunes and stuff.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Sweet,
Thanks,
man. Appreciate you, brother.
You too.
Talk soon.